Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to have you with me today. Today, I have a very special guest, and this is for the interviews for my UCLA class and other things that I do. I'm very privileged in that I'm able to invite subject matter experts to come and share their thoughts and their expertise and their experiences with students and families. And today, we're going to be talking about DACA and undocumented students and their situation, and especially here in the US with higher education. So I'm very pleased and privileged to be able to talk to Amy Pimentel. And Amy, we're so glad to have you here today.
Thank you for having me, Cindy.
And Amy, you tell us what your position is, where you're at, and what your position is.
So right now, I currently work at Maricosta Community College down in San Diego County, and my position is the Career Education Pathways Coordinator. So I currently work on early college credit programs with our neighboring high schools.
Oh, nice. So tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background and what this position that you're doing in the San Diego area entails.
So I started working in college access in 2007. I was working for a nonprofit that at the time was called College Summit and is now called Peer Forward. And that was working with high schools to build a college going culture. We did workshops, provided support, had a curriculum. And from there, it's just kind of grown into different opportunities. I worked in financial aid as an outreach specialist. And I've also built after school programs with that had college and career counseling and activities embedded in them. Um, and also at the college right now, I am part of our group of Undocu Ally Champions. So we do two trainings a semester where we train our colleagues at the college, working with undocumented students and providing resources and just trying to build a network of champions and people that are committed to supporting students. And so with my role, I mean, I really want to be able, regardless of a student's citizenship status, along with everything else, right? Race, religion, everything else, just that every student should be given the same opportunities to plan what their life is going to be like after high school and know that there's resources and support out there for them. Um, I don't say that in like a Pollyannish way. I know that there's different challenges that come along with people's different circumstances. But really my underlying goal is to provide equitable services and make sure that we're giving all kids the fair shot that they deserve.
Oh, I totally agree with you. And coming from my background working with students here in the Central Valley of California, in the AVID program, it's just there's so much potential, and to
Mhm.
deprive those students of those opportunities is just heartbreaking. So what does it mean now? What does it mean to be undocumented? And what students count in that, under that definition?
Sure. So a simple, a simplified way to think of it is that these are students that were not born in the United States and do not currently have a registration card or green card or a visa. So they have no legal documentation making them a citizen or resident or protected class with visas. Now this can change, right? Like a student can, I'm currently working with a student who came here with her family 4 years ago, undocumented. And on July 3rd, right before Independence Day, she told me that her family had just gotten approved for residency. So she's now a green card holder, right? And so her family status changed. So I think it's important to recognize that like someone's status can change, or with the families can be mixed status, right? Like student can have undocumented parents, but the student was born here and they're a US citizen. So you have those mixed status families. So it can be kind of tricky to navigate, because depending on a student's status, that's going to depend on the type of college list you build. Financial aid is going to be a huge factor. Understanding distance from home because of travel and access to family. So it's not just the student, but also their parents, their caregivers, whoever they're living with, whose status kind of plays into all of that.
Right. Well, that's a very good way of thinking about it and understanding it. It makes it much more clear to understand the category, but also the definition and the terms that we use, because you hear that word undocumented, but what does it mean? You've just explained. It's like they don't have the documentation, like a visa or a green card or something. And a lot of times, as you said, many families will have mixed. So you'll have older children that maybe were born in another country, then they came, and the families have younger children. So the younger children will be citizens, but the older children or the parents are not. And a lot of times they don't know this, right?
Right.
And so,
I've worked with students, especially back when I first started working on college access, in where sometimes students wouldn't know their status at all until now all of a sudden they're a senior in high school, and they've been talked to about college, their counselors pulling them in, they're excited, they want to go to college, and all of a sudden the parents have to put the brakes and say, have had to say, no, you can't, or, well, here's this other thing, here's what you need to know. And so, so sometimes there's students that, depending on how long they've been here, some may have no recollection of their home country.
right.
Others will have very vivid memories of that journey of immigrating.
Mm-hmm.
That can be traumatic. So I think it's just also important to recognize that everyone's story is different, and their circumstances are different, and to just, when working with these families that are undocumented or mixed status, to go in like with an open mind and not assume
Right.
that this is how it their situation is. I mean, someone could come at 2 years old and this is the only country they know.
Right. Yeah.
Their home, and to tell them something different, can be it can be challenging for them.
It can be very disturbing and very upsetting, because it basically comes out of the blue. It's something they were not expecting, or such. And a lot of times that comes when they have to fill out the FAFSA, and it asks for a social security number. And should a student who should fill out the FAFSA? Let me ask that question.
So only US citizens and permanent residents. So people who have a green card, it'll have on the back of the green card or permanent resident card. It's the same thing, but you often hear green card because of the color of it. On the FAFSA, it'll ask for an alien registration number that starts with an A. So students that have, and I say Social Security, also keep in mind with this, with no judgment attached, there are people who work under Social Security numbers that are not theirs. And so you also want to be mindful that when you are working with a family, you're being confident, keeping confidentiality, but that only students who are US citizens or permanent residents are filling out that card, and they even are filling out the application, and that even if a parent works under a false Social Security number, say the parent's not documented, parent is undocumented, and they work under a Social Security number that's not theirs, you want to make sure that parent does not use that social on the FAFSA. there are, so as a student, let's say a student who's a citizen, parents are not documented, they still can fill out a FAFSA. The parents will you just have to print out a signature page
Mhm.
to mail it in instead of creating the FSA ID, which is tied to a social. So explaining that to parents is important, explaining that schools protect information under FERPA, and that information isn't going to be shared is important.
Because they're afraid if they share that, then the INS or somebody will come and deport them, right?
Right. And so, there's a genuine fear there. There's also, I'll just add too, don't assume that that undocumented families don't pay taxes or file taxes, because they do. They often get an I-10. So you'll notice that when you get to that tax section on the FAFSA, it asks for a social security number or an I-10. And so they can input their I-10, to show that they've been to have their tax information. So I think the number one thing out of anything when working with this population, any student population really, is know the information that's out there, but don't go in with assumptions.
Mhm.
And it can be, if this is a new, if you're new to working with this population and you're unsure, try to find other folks who are more well versed with working with this population, so you don't give the wrong information. And you don't want to give legal advice, right? But maybe you can find an organization that does that and can help them. And in some states, like in California, we're really lucky, right? We have the DREAM Act application. So students that are not US citizens or don't have a permanent residency card, they can submit the DREAM Act application. And so if you're in a state other than California, you'll want to look and see what financial aid resources are available for these students in your states.
Mhm. Yeah, and there are some states that won't even allow students to be considered as in-state students if they're undocumented, and some won't even allow students to even attend college in that state.
Right.
I think there's like 2 states like that, and I have that in my UCLA information. So what about DACA? What's the status of DACA currently? I know it's, since the election, things have changed, and it's a much more positive approach right now, but I know it's still been in flux. So,
Right. So the previous administration, one of the first things that they did was to try to they wanted to end DACA, and it's been going through the courts and had different ups and downs. Where it currently stands is that when the current administration took office, President Biden signed an executive order reinstating DACA back to what it was when it was first signed in 2012. So what it is DACA it's not a citizenship status. It provides temporary protection against deportation, and it provides a social security number for work purposes only. And so this is where you also have to be, where DACA and financial aid, FAFSA, can get kind of muddy. Is a student may say, like, yeah, I have a social security number, I can do the FAFSA, here's my social security card. But really their social is through DACA. So a DACA social security does not make you eligible to fill out a FAFSA. And you'll know the difference because the social security card will say for work purposes only.
mm,
And so that's kind of your key there. So a student or a person to qualify for DACA, they have to have been, I have my little cheat sheet here so that I make sure I get this all right. They have to be at least 15 the time that they're submitting, and they had to have been under the age of 31 as of June 15th, 2012. And that's because that's when DACA was first signed by President Obama. They have to have been resided in the country continuously. They had to come to the US before they turned 16. There's education requirements, right? So they have to be in school or have been in school or get a GED, or be honorably discharged from the military. So you can be undocumented and serve
in the military.
You
And that still doesn't give you citizen status.
And it still doesn't give you citizenship status.
Amazing.
Yeah. And you have to have basically a clean criminal record, right? So and this is only good for 2 years, and every 2 years someone has to DACA recipients have to reapply. Over the last 4 years of the previous administration, even though there was periods where no new applications were accepted, only renewals, and no renewals. I mean, it's been haywire. But even when renewals were accepted, there was a lot of people, because of the administration's viewpoints and tactics, that were too scared to file renewals. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of tricky. There is a cost. It's about $500, I think. And so that's expensive, especially if you think of, like, let's say a family that has like multiple children. Mm-hmm. And it can take months for the paperwork to process and go through. You make a minor mistake, it gets rejected, and you have to start all over again. So that's the biggest thing. It doesn't, I think, for counselors to know, having a DACA social does not mean now you can submit a FAFSA. It's not a status. It just protects somebody from being deported and gives them the Social Security for work purposes only. So now they can work using that Social Security number, not have to worry about using a fake social, or not struggle with trying to get a job. So be limited to just certain jobs, because we know there's certain employers and industries that hire a lot of undocumented folks, right? And so now this opens up other opportunities for them.
And as you're talking, this also, DACA is not a path to citizenship then. No. It doesn't, there's no direct, you do this step and then this step to take you closer to citizenship then.
No, and there's people that, they'll be on a list waiting 10, 15 years, depending on their situation. There currently is no direct path to citizenship. There's a couple of different bills that have been introduced in Congress, or that, but haven't been brought to the floor. I mean, the Dream Act, the Federal Dream Act, that would be a path to citizenship, is 20 years old. Mm-hmm. There's different legislation out there. And I can send that to you if you want to add it to your resources.
Yeah, and I'll post it.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, there's unfortunately no path to citizenship, even though these folks contribute to our society and our communities in very meaningful ways. Like I said earlier, they're paying their taxes, they're business owners. But we have no path to citizenship for them.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges for the whole country in terms of immigration. And in our class we have students all in countries all over the world, and I know, for example, in Canada there's much easier paths to citizenship, especially for students who are in higher education. So that's Yeah, that's a challenge. So what advice, Amy, do you give to counselors who find out a student is undocumented? One of the things you mentioned is don't make assumptions, and I totally agree with that. And have seen that, experience that myself as a counselor. What other advice would you give, or how any other specifics that you would um, have people be aware of?
Yeah. So I think one thing is you definitely want to make sure you know a student's situation so that you can advise them the best way you can, right? Um, so one thing is you're looking at a transcript and you see that they were born in another country. You can ask the other, um, you can ask about their status. The other thing is, um, if you see when it's time to fill out applications, FAFSA, and you see their social security number, you see their registration card, then you need to like intervene there. Ideally, you're able to have the conversation before it gets to that point. Um, but I think also, especially in our country, the assumption in the US is that all undocumented people are Latinx.
Right.
And
Right. That is
that's
very
not that's not the case, right? So you don't want to just necessarily pull aside every Latinx student and ask them their status. That would be bad. Um, I laugh in a nervous laughter defense mechanism way, not that, not that I think that would be funny to do. Um, so I have seen where like some high schools where they pull like a query and the counselors pulled in individually each student that showed that they were born in another country and just asked them and said, hey, I just need to know because this is going to impact how we move forward with your college application process. So I just need to know like your situation. And so I think for those that are in schools that is can be an effective way. You'd want to make sure though that all your counselors are also on board and comfortable. And before doing that you know what the situation is in your state or your country of how to support those students. Don't try, I mean, we're not lawyers, right? That's not our profession. So seek out and do some research and see like what legal resources are available so that you can hand that off to students and say, here's a free legal resource that you've vetted in case they would like to look at what their options are. A lot of times like Jewish family resource centers have some kind of legal resource. MALDEF, the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund, Immigrants Rising. These are all organizations that are have good reputations and can at least be a starting point and help. And a lot of them do free legal counseling. For those that are maybe in the nonprofit setting, or maybe you're a private counselor, but you're going to do some pro bono work, you could probably add something into just your initial intake questionnaire that is asking them what is your citizenship status, and explain to everybody, I have to ask this so that I know how to best support you. And just make sure that if you're asking that to one, you're doing that with everybody, because again, that goes back to assumptions. And you would want to ask about the parents' status as well. So I think, trying to stay up to date, finding partners in your community, because things are always changing. So knowing who you can turn to, and I mean, I think this applies to anything, that it's always okay to say, I just want to double check on some things before we move forward. Sign up for listservs like with Immigrants Rising, MALDEF. They also have scholarships lists that they'll put together every year for scholarships that don't require a social security number. And I think that always like just setting realistic expectations with students, right? And really talking things through, just like we do with any student, this is just a different layer.
Right. Right. No, I
And
know.
I think another resource, I'm assuming other states have it, but I know like in California, there's a list of occupations that don't require a social security number to get your business license.
Oh,
So, you know, knowing that, like, or talking to a student, okay, that they have a certain dream or goal, but realistically, they're not going to be able to do that right now. What are some other options? Can they start their own business? Can they be a business owner? Right. And I think that goes again to just being realistic, and that sometimes it is heartbreaking because they're not going to be able to pursue the dream they want to pursue.
mhm.
So I think supporting them and walking them through, well, what are our options, and you know, looking at how you can support them, and just being sensitive to, um, it's very scary. It's very scary of everything that, just of what it means to be undocumented or have a mixed status family, and just that kind of constant living on edge, and not knowing who to trust. You know, so I think just kind of being open. I would also suggest looking at, contacting colleges in your community colleges, four-year schools, um, and ask them about their support that they have for undocumented students, and also ask them, do they provide any trainings? Can you join a training?
Mhm.
What can you, like at the, you know, many of the colleges in California have dream resource centers. Can you attend one of their trainings, or can they put you in touch with someone, or can you come in, you know, for a meeting, and can they share some resource and information with you? I think you'll find that anybody that works with this population they're eager to build allies and champions and build a network. So you know, those are just some, yeah, those are some things I could think of.
Oh, I think that's great. And I love the term champions. I think that's just a great way to capture what it is that you do and what we do as counselors. And I think your point of, you know, that open communication and just building that rapport, because you have to build that level of trust before you can get to that stage of, well, you know, what is your exact status and how can I help you? They have to trust that you're going to be able to do that. And asking everybody the same thing, not singling out certain students. So that's very true. Well, Amy,
Yeah.
thank you so much. I appreciate your time and all of this information, and we'll be looking forward to receiving the links and the other documents too. So,
No problem.
well,
Thank
good
you for
luck with
having me.
everything as you go back to school and
Yes, you too.
start the new year.
And good luck, everybody, to all of your students. You have a fabulous instructor. So, oops.